much for coming tonight. We are talking about wildlife today, as you are all very well aware by this point. This is part of our Watershed planning series of stakeholder meetings, and the City of Gaithersburg is, of course, sponsoring this event. So let's go ahead and get started. Switch to the next slide. So we're going to do a couple of quick opening questions and a brief introduction. I'm going to talk for just a couple of minutes about an overview of watershed wildlife and what you guys can do to help protect the city's wildlife. And then I'm going to turn it over to Joshua here from DNR to talk all about beavers, which I am very excited to hear more about. Then we'll close up tonight with some trivia, which I hope will be fun, and if you don't have fun, I at least will. So that will be something to look forward to at the end of today's meeting. Next slide. All right, so you should all have a note card in front of you. You are welcome to write your name on your note card, or you can stay anonymous if you want, whatever floats your boat, and you can wait until you see the questions before you decide to. Next. So first question is if you are, oh, go ahead, Nancy.
Can you tell us who you are?
Oh yeah, I forgot. I know who I am. What do you mean? All right, my name is Jordan Fox. I am a GIS analyst and research specialist with the Center for Watershed Protection, which is an environmental nonprofit organization that provides science and engineering technical services to local governments and collaborative organizations throughout the Chesapeake Bay watershed and the United States. I am managing this project on behalf of the City of Gaithersburg with a considerable amount of help and support from the city and all of the city's partners. So yeah, thank you, Nancy. Hi, again.
And welcome.
Anyway, yes, and welcome.
We're very excited to have you all come in person, especially. Hopefully you've come to some of our virtual events, and we really need your input. So your value to us is significant, and we are honored that you're here and want to thank you for that. So we hope you enjoy this program in particular.
Thanks, Nancy. So yeah, let us know if this is your first time joining us or if you've been to one of our in-person or virtual meetings before. And then next slide. And then the next question is just if you have any ideas of ways that you would like to contribute to this watershed planning project. We have a couple of listed ideas here, like participating in volunteer stream assessments, which will be kicking off in the near future. We need your help inspecting over 140 miles of streams throughout the city's watersheds. We also have an option to participate in more community events, kind of like this one, which we could use your help hosting or attending more in the future. We're also looking for specific problem areas or general overarching concerns that you might have within the watershed, whether that's pollutants or land management or some combination. And then lastly, we're looking for stakeholders to provide some input once we get to the proposing solutions stage. So if you would like to chime in at that stage more, you can feel free to jot that down too. Or if there's any other way that you want to contribute to the project, like hosting bird walks or I don't know, whatever you want to put down, feel free. Next slide. All right, so let's just talk a little bit about wildlife to kick us off. Next. Oh, I have to talk louder? All right, yes.
It's a big room.
I
There
know.
should be a working microphone on the podium if you plugged it in and turned it on.
Well, I did not do that.
Okay.
Can I just yell?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, you got it.
Hear me if I yell? Okay. Let's talk about watershed wildlife.
Okay. You're a
Okay.
theater kid, right?
I was not.
Really?
Yeah, no. I was a band
You
nerd.
have that aura.
I don't know if I should say thank you to that one. Okay. So here's a little bit of an overview just to say that all areas of the urban, suburban, and rural environments support wildlife in some way, shape, or form. So our urban cities, our suburban neighborhoods, our rural farms, are more human areas where you obviously see wildlife throughout on a daily basis. But then there's also more natural areas in the city's watersheds, like our riparian corridors, which is like the 50 to 100 foot buffers around streams and the in-stream habitat itself, and protected natural areas, which there are a lot of throughout the city's watersheds for Parks and Planning Commission and various state and local parks. Next slide. So I just wanted to include pictures for fun. There are lots and lots of different types of species in the city's watersheds. Montgomery County actually has a really cool website where they enumerate different types, or like how many species of salamanders or frogs or whatever there are in the county, and there's so much cool stuff here. Many of the species in the city's watersheds are sensitive to pollution, so we can use them as indicators for how healthy our streams are. And many of these species are in need of our protection, both in terms of how we manage our land and how we treat our natural areas. Next slide. A quick little plug here for if you have any wildlife concerns or issues in your day-to-day lives. The city does have an animal services department, and here is some information about the services that that department provides. So you don't need permits to track wildlife on your property, but there may be exceptions to those rules, and you can scan the QR code for more details. The Animal Services Board also hosts monthly meetings if you're really enthused about this or have any ideas you'd like to share with them. And there's also free rabies vaccines to all residents in the county. So, good to know. Feel free to scan that QR code for more information. Next slide. All right, this is the stuff I'm excited about. So I just have a couple of tips to kick us off about what you can specifically do to help protect local wildlife. Next. First is never to litter. Even a banana peel or an apple core or anything like that. Those things have nutrients and organic matter. They attract pests and all kinds of things, so you do not want to litter. Next, reduce the amount of road salt you use. A lot of fish and benthic macroinvertebrates are extremely sensitive to salinization, and not just the animals, but the plants too. A lot of our roadside vegetation or streamside vegetation is not acclimated to large amounts of salt, and it is killing things and creating large-scale salinization of fresh water, which is a challenge because there is no way to remove fluoride once it's polluted water bodies. Next slide. So fertilizer for turf grass lawns. Ideally, replace your turf grass lawns with some nice wildflower meadows like Janine was telling us about earlier outside. I'm sorry, Jeanette. Oh,
Jeanette.
I keep doing that. I just
Everyone
made that.
does.
I'm sorry, Jeanette. So yeah, use less fertilizer on your turf grass lawn if you have one, and then try and replace some of that turf grass with more wildlife-friendly pollinator plants. Next. Always pick up your dog poop. I am surprised by the amount of people who think that their dog poop is helping the environment because it's fertilizer and nutrients helping the plants to grow. It is a direct source of nutrient pollution, but also bacteria. Fecal coliform bacteria, E. coli, there are like regulated contaminants for those things in our waterways, so please pick up your dog poop. Next slide. And then lastly, plant native plants in and around your property and coordinate with partner organizations and community spaces to get more native plants on the ground there as well. There are a lot of ornamental invasive plants around. I know in the house I was renting, there was nandina, so the heavenly bamboo, which if birds eat too many of those berries, they die. That's not what we're looking for in terms of accessory vegetation in our yards, and there are lots of really healthy and beneficial alternatives. So that's just a little bit of a kick-off with some things that you can do and keep in mind. And next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Joshua to tell us more about beavers and coexisting with them.
All right. Wonderful. So I'll briefly introduce myself. I'm going to pass a beaver pelt that I have around the room. If you want to handle it, feel free. If not, just feel free to ask me. Can I start here?
Yeah.
It's a program pelt, so it's been through like all kinds of elementary school programs, and it might be.
Can you yell too?
I can. I'm sorry, I was just mumbling about this. It will be. Let me see. I can advance the slides.
Oh.
Might try to resave maybe, or I could just put my laptop in too. Oh, there it is. Is it okay if I just rotate this and kind of move in here? All right. So I'm here today from the Department of Natural Resources to talk about beavers in the state of Maryland. Louder. Okay. My name is Joshua Tabora. I'm from Montgomery County, so I actually grew up in Germantown. My first job with DNR was a seasonal ranger position at Seneca Creek State Park. So this is like kind of my backyard, not quite, like one watershed over. But it's really nice to be back home. It's a good excuse to have dinner with my parents this evening. I moved from Montgomery County to Allegheny to go to school at Frostburg. I finished a bachelor's degree in wildlife management there. And I've worked for the Department of Natural Resources since 2015, but I've had this position since 2020. To talk briefly about kind of the role of the Department of Natural Resources, Wildlife and Heritage Service. Myself and my colleagues manage research and craft policy around like all of the wildlife species in Maryland. So that includes our game species, like animals that support a hunting and trapping season, waterfowl, rare threat and endangered species as well. So like I have a Delmarva fox squirrel in the middle. And a lot of this work is done through like scientific research and surveys. The last picture I have is one that my colleague took of a bear den visitor survey conducted in Garrett County. So I'm a fur bearer biologist. To introduce what that means, I put this up here because it's kind of a confusing word, but it's fur bearer, kind of think like pallbearer. There's your phonetic pronunciation. Fur bearer is kind of an odd term, and I was talking to a couple of you about this before we got into the presentation. But it's a little disorienting because it's not a taxonomic term, right? It's not a scientific term, it's a cultural and economic one. So there are 14 species of fur bearer in the state of Maryland. But like I was saying earlier, it's a cultural construct. So all these animals are mammals, they all have hair, and they all live in Maryland, but aside from that, they don't have much else in common. There's a marsupial in this group, the lone marsupial in North America, the Virginia opossum. There's semi-aquatic rodents, one of which is native to South America. That's our nutria, which is no longer present in Maryland. And 13 other like native, semi-native species that range from rodents to mesocarnivores, canids. Like I think our largest fur bearer is the beaver, weighing in I think larger animals will get upwards of 80 pounds. Muskrats are relatively small. I think like a small one might be like 1.5 to 2 pounds. The thing that unites that group and that suite of species in common is that they all are valued culturally or economically for their fur value. And most of these species support hunting and trapping seasons that are regulated by the Department of Natural Resources. So they are a group of animals that are kind of valued for their fur value. I think since we can't really talk about beavers in the state of Maryland without talking about coexistence and tolerance, I think one important concept to introduce before we kind of get into the meat of our talk is something like that you call cultural carrying capacity, right? So biological carrying capacity is the number of animals that a landscape can support and wants to support. And it's not a set number. Resources wax and wane from year to year due to droughts, due to disease cycles and all this, and that could affect the number of animals on the landscape. So biological carrying capacity is somewhat static, but it's the number of animals that the habitat can support with constraints on water resources, food, cover, and things like that. Cultural carrying capacity adds kind of humans into that context, right? So that's the number of animals that the people that live on that landscape alongside those animals are willing to tolerate. Sometimes that number is lower than the biological carrying capacity. If we think about like the number of mountain lions that people are willing to tolerate in the eastern U.S., right, especially along the eastern seaboard, that number is 0. In some cases, that number is above the biological carrying capacity. In some parts of Maryland, white-tailed deer densities are extremely high, but in some areas that's also prized because of their cultural and recreational importance. So introducing that kind of like concept, and we'll get back into it later, but cultural and carrying capacity is something that like I'd encourage you to think about as we talk about beavers and their place and on our landscape and our ecology throughout the evening. So getting into our main subject, Castor canadensis is the scientific name for the North American beaver. They're captivating. They're multifaceted animals. They have some really neat, like segmented life histories. They have a single litter per year, and females come into estrus in midwinter, which is like around January, and they have a relatively long gestation of 100 to 110 days, after which they'll give birth to 2 to 5 kits, as the young are referred to. At birth, the kits have a full set of teeth, and they're fully furred, which is relatively unique, but fairly common for fully aquatic animals, or fully aquatic mammals, I should say. At 2 to 3 weeks of age, they can begin to eat vegetation, and the young will remain with the adults until 2 years of age, where they'll disperse and go find a home range of their own. Interestingly, beavers are monogamous. They're relatively rare in the mammal kingdom with that distinction, but they'll form mated pairs, oftentimes for life, but at a bare minimum for an extended period of time, and they'll work cooperatively between the male and the female to raise their young. Has anybody here seen a beaver before? So most of the people in the room. Has anybody ever seen a baby beaver, kit beaver? They're super tiny, but they're really stinking cute. One thing that like kind of to anthropomorphize the animal a little bit, beavers they have prehensile hands. So like adult and like parent beavers they'll pick the young up and almost like swaddle them like humans. It's kind of neat. But the young beavers make noises like very like remarkably similar to human children. It's almost like a little off-putting. Much of a beaver's life is based around the construction and maintenance of the structures that they need to make it on the landscape. Did anybody not get to hold this? Cool. Beavers are obviously known for dam construction, right? I think that's probably why most of the people in this room know of them or are interested about them. But that infrastructure really facilitates their day-to-day activity. The dam building it's really an artifact of the need of beavers to be able to transport food and lodging to a centralized location, but it functions as like a multifaceted structure where beaver ponds and beaver channels they're not just conveyance channels, and they're not just for transportation. It's security covered, it's food storage as well. So oftentimes what kind of creates bottleneck on where beavers can settle is like the depth to bedrock or the depth of the channel that they can create. And if it's not below a certain depth, it leaves them relatively vulnerable to land-based predators like coyotes. Really, like wolves are actually like a serious predator of beavers in the Great Lakes, obviously not in the eastern United States. Those ponds and slack waters that they create around their lodges or their bank dens are also used for cold weather food storage. So beginning sometime around like September, beavers will begin to cache woody vegetation that has fresh cambium in cold water. And that will act as a larder over the winter in order to keep beavers in fresh vegetation outside of the growing season. Beavers don't always build dams. Oftentimes, especially in the coastal plain and in like the Piedmont, which is where we are right now, where you have like slow-moving, meandering streams. I think Great Seneca Creek's a really good example of it. The Monocacy on a different scale, but like the Conococheague and where else? I think those would be pretty good examples. Muddy Branch isn't quite one, and I can talk about that in a later part of the presentation. But wherever you have kind of those like deep enough soils to excavate bank dens, you'll often see beavers constructing those instead of lodges, especially on creek channels where your water level is highly variable due to rain events and things like that. Any stone unturned. Beavers do not hibernate, which means that they need to be functional year-round, and that's where that cache comes in. So creating that deep water around the den site allows them to store food, remain active year-round, and escape from predators. Any questions so far?
So if you destroy their den,
You
what
destroy their
happens?
den.
Or their dam.
So if you destroy a beaver's dam, they have a very keen ear for running water. It is very, very difficult to destroy a beaver's dam without hydraulic equipment, or without an excavator or something like that in a meaningful way. Typically, I'd expect complete restoration within a 2 or 3 day period if the beavers are dedicated to being at that site. If it's a new establishment, sometimes that could disincentivize habitation there. But in general, the materials that they're working with are pretty common. They're using sticks and mud, and they'll work tirelessly overnight to restore, to essentially water stoppage. So until they stop hearing that running water, they'll keep plugging the dam. So it's very, very difficult to destroy them. Does that answer your question?
I think we've had some places where they did remove them, and I was just curious if you,
Right.
I guess, because people didn't want them there because they were
Sure.
encroaching on infrastructure. So I think the beaver did really choose to relocate.
Probably.
So then I guess they have enough to, if they can create it fast enough, then they're fine.
I tell you what, Megan, hold that. We'll get into
Okay.
that. There's a coexistence bit of this.
Okay.
So the habitat that beavers create kind of makes them a keystone species, right? And that makes them really, really valuable to allied suites of animals and completely unrelated suites of animals as well. The infrastructure that they install for their own needs provides a lot of benefit to other species. The ponds are used by a wide variety of fish, macroinvertebrates, herpetofauna, so turtles, frogs, toads, salamanders, you name it. There are several species of dragonflies. Does anybody in this room have any kind of entomology background? There's a couple species of darners in particular that associate very closely with beaver ponds, I should say. If you think of a beaver pond as a very, very slowly leaking sieve, it moves water slowly, so it's not ever not moving, but it's always moving very, very slowly. So that very slow amount of water movement and the steady depth and temperature create this really unique microhabitat that hosts certain species of insects that are rapidly declining. So hydrated soils adjacent to beaver ponds also support any number of different wildlife. So a lot of shorebirds will use them. I was walking around some beaver influenced habitat earlier today, kind of getting ready for this presentation. And on one of the beaver ponds that I visited, I saw 3 or 4 different frog species, 4 different turtle species, cattle egret, green heron, and just a number of different bird, and shoreline bird species. So it creates a very rich kind of mosaic of habitat. And even as abandoned, even after beaver ponds and beaver structures are abandoned, they continue to see use. So otters and muskrats and turtle species as well will commonly use abandoned beaver dens with their kind of multi-chambered, chambers within them. But the beaver pond itself is also really valuable. So even when that dam no longer is effective and is drained, the dams are often functional long enough that they'll trap silt, and they can become really, really good, not quite wetland habitat, but once the water recedes and you get back to a single stream channel, you can have a meadow habitat adjacent to the stream where the pond took place. So that creates a lot of valuable early successional habitat with forbs and herbaceous growth regenerating. That's valuable to any number of other species. So on both a micro and a macro scale, at least historically, beavers do have a very important effect on our landscape. Especially, I think, this is a room full of people that like I think is watershed minded. So like the Chesapeake Bay is never too far away from anybody's thoughts, right? Beaver dams help to facilitate like bay health in a number of ways. So those ponds act as kind of modulators of water temperature, right? So that depth buys you a lot of thermal mass when you're regulating water temperature. So that it's helping to cool the water coming into the bay. As I mentioned previously, it also traps silt and sediment. So beaver ponds are a slow-moving sieve. They filter a lot of material, and they trap a lot of the nutrients that would otherwise be flowing straight into the bay, like a more straightforward conveyance channel. So for that reason, beavers they're kind of beyond a keystone species in this region. I mean, they really are just an inherent part of the ecology, at least historically. I think in a lot of parts of suburban Maryland, we're fortunate enough to have like watershed protections and setbacks from riparian corridors. However, even with a lack of development in those riparian corridors, those buffers are still relatively small. So even with like a 200-yard buffer, you're asking that strip of forested or vegetated land to do like lifting that miles and miles of habitat we're doing previously. So you're just not getting the filtration effects that you would on a natural landscape, especially with the ratio of impervious surfaces in this region. For that reason, any kind of like, I guess, additional filtration on those water bodies, whether man-made or natural, in this case natural, is really valuable. So beavers are essential kind of components of this landscape. I was mentioning beaver influenced habitat earlier. This is a picture that I took at what I think is probably like an abandoned beaver pond, less than like half a mile from here. So this is on, it's really, it's right off of Muddy Branch. It might be in somebody's neighborhood.
Yeah, it's just right over there.
Yeah.
It's not the Washingtonian Woods, Gaithersburg City Park.
It would be difficult for me to tell you. I'm not certain, but I don't think it is. I'm pretty. It is just right over
We
there.
call it the mist stream.
Yes.
Bike path adjacent to Mist.
Probably.
I think we're not.
Well, I can pull it up because I actually put that beaver on my natural list.
Oh, you did.
Yeah. Before it was abandoned.
So you were able to capture a picture of the beaver?
Yeah.
Recently, or?
Oh no, it's probably been, we haven't seen the beaver there for about a year, and our last
Okay,
bill
interesting.
go. Because you test the water down there, right? By the beaver, have you seen the beavers in the last year?
So I judging from the sign. I think it's likely that there's no longer beaver present at that site. It doesn't look like there's any current usage or feeding sign. In generally, there's a lot of sticks or freshly gnawed branches in the water where you have current beaver activity. So I think it's fairly safe to assume that there's no longer beaver there. However, I think you'll probably see the effects of what I was describing, where as that water kind of pinches back into as whatever dam structure that they have that fails, that water will pinch back into a singular channel, and you'll see kind of a meadow form in the previous beaver pond. If that makes any sense.
So if they leave an area,
They
where
leave
they
an
go, I mean, they don't always go the same place, but where are they likely to go?
So it's very common for beavers to just pull up shop and move for a couple reasons. Some beavers in good enough habitat will maintain 2 or 3 different den sites in various kind of levels of repair, and they'll move from den to den based on the number of fleas and ectoparasites that they have. So they'll move from a site that has a high ectoparasite load to one that has a lower load, kind of as a way of regulating their parasite load, which is pretty interesting, I thought. But it can do with food. It can have to do with food resources, water level, or any number of things. Typically, at a site like this, they'd probably be using Muddy Branch to move.
They just follow the water?
Yes, yeah. They'll move over land as well. Beavers will move well over a mile over land, but they can smell water and they can smell hydrated soil. So they can find relatively remote farm ponds that are only that don't have a water channel or a hydrated water channel going to them. It's pretty interesting how efficient they are colonizing. But I think I'd mentioned it earlier. At 2 years of age, they kind of the beavers leave their home place to seek out the fortunes, right? So you're dispersing animals that are traveling around the landscape are those 2-year-old reproductively mature, but still like relatively inexperienced animals. So those are your dispersers. Typically using like larger water channels. Like a lot of beavers are moving up and down the Potomac in January and late December, and you have your dispersal window. Yeah, that's a great question though.
For that one, my last photos of it are April last year.
April last. That kind of tracks for the sign. So I mean, I took a picture of that. That's a regenerating Carpinus caroliniana. What do you call it? Ironwood, muscle. Beaver tree felling has like a couple different like facets that benefit the beaver and the habitat. A beaver will cut down a tree to eat the cambium off of it and to gain access to like the new growth at the top of the tree. But it has a self-reinforcing effect where when they cut down hardwood trees, those trees regenerate from stump sprouts. And that's what you can see here. Those stump sprouts then create kind of like a bushy form that creates more or less like a constant supply of fresh woody vegetation that's then accessible to that beaver. So if you have that consistently enough along a riparian channel, it creates excellent early successional habitat, and it gets sunlight to the forest floor, so it increases your woody plant and like seed bank regeneration out of the soil. That's not just good for the beavers, it's good for a lot of different species, like white-tailed deer among them. There's all kinds of forest birds that benefit from having kind of broken up meadows or areas where sunlight's hitting the ground in an otherwise forest interior environment. So just that little bit of texture on either side of a stream channel, where maybe beavers are only affecting the vegetative regime 50 yards in either direction, can have like a real effect on the ecology. I have a slide on here about the physiographic regions of Maryland. I don't know how pertinent it is for this group. For those of you who don't know, we're in the Piedmont right now, which is characterized by like relatively flat, tillable soils. Further to the west, we have like the Blue Ridge, then the Ridge and Valley, and lastly the Appalachian Plateau. And then to our east, we have the coastal plain, both the western and the eastern coastal plain. Most of the state's beavers are outside of the montane region of the state, so they're in the Piedmont and they're in the coastal plain. And that makes sense when you think about Maryland. That's where most of the water is. It makes sense that that's where most of the water-based beavers are. So we're in a place that has plenty of beaver habitat, at least plenty of historic beaver habitat. If you kind of use your imagination to overlay that map with like a map of the Washington, D.C. Beltway, right? When you think about where most of the 8 million people that live in Maryland live, it's where most of the beavers live, so you're going to have some level of conflict, right? Especially because people tend to settle around water, and even with the development setbacks that we have, you're bound to run into some of that conflict.
So it worries me about not seeing that beaver for a year, because I know there were neighbors complaining about it.
It's very possible. I mean, it's possible that neighbors decided to do something about it or call a trapper, but it's very possible that a beaver moved on from that site for any number of reasons. It's not something that screams like excellent beaver habitat, and it could just be that there is enough water in that area from rain events for it to be able to set up like a temporary residence, but one that wasn't sustainable over a period of time.
We were its first one-room apartment.
Exactly. It could be its starter home, maybe,
Yeah.
if we're being generous. So I think kind of one of the questions that's operative in this presentation is, how does a state that's as densely populated as Maryland, there's many different jurisdictions and waterways, manage the conflict between humans and wildlife, particularly beavers? It doesn't, beavers are very transformative on the landscape, but it doesn't come without its share harm or detraction, at least to human or economic activity. Beavers do threaten infrastructure in some parts of the state, mainly in some of the flatter regions of the state, like the coastal plain, that are pretty flood-proof, but don't have a lot of elevation. So like a 1 foot increase in a water level can make a huge difference to a farmer in the eastern shore, right? That can be the difference between a 200-acre field and like an 80-acre field, right? So that's something that we have to keep in mind. Beavers can damage agriculture to some extent by flooding fields. some extent transportation agriculture. Transportation infrastructure is probably one of the biggest effects that they have that's deleterious to human activities. One of the ones that's more commonly encountered in this area would be damage to ornamental trees or like plantings, or things like that. So how do you deal with that? There's a number of ways to kind of coexist with beavers or to deal with them, if that's not a step that you're interested in taking. But kind of one of the most drastic would be to install a pond leveler or some kind of coexistence device. So Megan, you'd asked me about what happens if you damage or destroy a beaver's dam. They respond to the sound of moving water. A pond leveler kind of gets you around having to remove a beaver dam, but still allowing you to regulate the water level of a beaver pond. The way it works is that an intake cage, which is like the inflow of a drain, is sunk in relatively deep water, and deep enough so that it doesn't create any suction and it doesn't create any like the sound of any flow. And the outflow is either piped through the dam itself or over in order to facilitate drainage. And in this case, because the beaver can't hear flowing water, it keeps them from being able to find the source of the leak, and it keeps them from plugging it. This diagram makes it look a little wonky, but as long as it functions as a siphon. So to some extent, you can facilitate the flow of water against the direction of gravity for a little bit, as long as you have like the outflow portion correctly and like an elevation below your inflow. So this is something that's like kind of more for engineered structures, or for like if a pond like the one behind us were to have like beaver issues at the standpipe, you could implement something like this. There are a lot of considerations when choosing whether to put that in or not, or whether you have a site that's can facilitate a pond leveler. So it's a complicated decision. Oftentimes contractors will do these. If anybody has any questions about installing like a beaver baffle or a pond leveler, feel free to ask me after the presentation. I'd be happy to share the resources with you or give you a couple links or something like that. I think for the scale that we're working on, there's a couple other like strategies that are pretty effective, especially when it comes to counteracting their effects on ornamental plants or landscape trees, whatever the case. Caging is one of those that is commonly used, although not always correctly. Caging with proper setbacks from the trees, using like 2" by 4" fence wire is generally considered to be the best practice, using like a hardwood stake or something like that. At 4 feet of height, beavers are actually like surprisingly tall and surprisingly large animals. So anything below like 3 feet, they can definitely get into or pull down pretty easily. A lot of people make the mistake of using like chicken wire or hardware cloth. The problem with chicken wire is it's relatively flimsy and it rusts pretty easily, so it's not very rigid. Hardware cloth is just unsightly, so it's difficult to. It can be difficult to, I guess, justify in a recreational setting, especially in like an urban park or something like this. Another mistake that I see pretty often is people won't leave enough room for the growth of the tree, and they'll end up girdling the tree that they're trying to save if they're not monitoring that structure. Something else that you can implement if you're thinking about doing this in an urban setting or a recreational setting is sand painting. So you can mix like play sand or building sand into exterior rated latex paint. And to some degree you can match like the natural tones of the bark on the tree. But by blending those two together, you're actually like putting some, like an abrasive in that paint that's hostile to the beavers, and they don't like it on their teeth. It's not a concrete like 100% all the time works deterrent, but it's actually surprisingly effective, and it allows you to maintain more of a natural appearance in the settings that you're managing. The QR code down there has instructions from a resource online that I refer people to all the time, and I think it's pretty helpful. In this region, we're also fortunate enough to have like a couple NGOs that are pretty handy. So the Human Beaver Coexistence Fund is, I think it's kind of a national organization, but they have staff in Northern Virginia. So Allison Zach is a friend and a colleague of mine, but she kind of is, I think their role is kind of connecting people with the proper course of action for what they're dealing with, and the resources to, I guess, accomplish those actions. So sometimes she sends people my way, sometimes she sends people to the contractors that can put some of those pond levelers in. Sometimes she refers people to a trapper, if the constraints in their situation or their resources means that that's the best way to do things. Speaking about coexistence, I'd kind of be remiss if I didn't mention like regulated beaver harvest, regulated beaver trapping. Coexistence is kind of our first line of defense, so to speak, and it's something that is definitely encouraged. However, it's often impractical or undesirable depending on the setting, especially in places where you have threats to critical infrastructure or economic activities like agriculture. A homeowner or entity in Maryland can either trap the beaver within the legal trapping season under the authority of a hunting license. They can hire a nuisance cooperator to do so. And I have a QR code to our nuisance cooperator directory, or they can apply for a permit to actively trap outside of the regulated season. Due to like a number of reporting mechanisms and post-season harvest surveys, it's one of my duties to determine the harvest for all of our fur bearer species, and I can confirm that Maryland's beaver harvest is actually very, very modest for the number of people that we have and the number of beavers that we have. So this isn't anything that affects our beavers on a population level and does not cause them to become endangered or threatened in any way. On this note, and kind of one of the last things I want to talk about before we move into questions is regulated trapping. So I think in a couple of discussions that I had with some of you prior to the meeting, trapping is something that elicits some negative emotions, right? It's kind of thought of with a negative connotation. But I think it's important to realize that trapping still happens, and it creates like a lot of residuals for communities. But it takes a very different form than it did 100 or even like 50 years ago. So modern regulated trapping is scientifically researched. It is carefully regulated and it's enforceable. So there's natural resources police whose sole duty it is to enforce hunting, trapping, and fishing regulations in Maryland. So having that enforcement and the research components kind of create a harvest regime that's both sustainable and has residuals for the community at large. But because of that careful planning, hunting and trapping seasons don't cause unintentional population declines, and they don't cause species to become rare, threatened, or endangered like they may have in the past when these things weren't regulated as carefully. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions I have. If anybody's on LinkedIn, it's a QR code to my LinkedIn. Happy to take questions about beavers, other fur bearers, just DNR in general. Please, ma'am, go ahead.
Question about the beaver harvest.
Please.
Is that from relocation or are they hunting from their farm?
For both in some cases, relocation is legal in Maryland, but you do need to have written permission for both private and public lands. But beaver harvest happens on both like a recreational and like, I would say like a permitted professional level as well.
I did a little research. I have a raccoon that lives in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a nuisance relative to trapping.
Sure.
And apparently you cannot release raccoons. Is that a concern for beavers too?
That's correct. So raccoons, foxes, and skunks are regulated separately because of rabies vector species. Technically, any mammal can get rabies, and we've actually had a couple cases where beavers have gotten rabies in Maryland within the last 5 years. However, like we're interested in regulating like the higher volume species. So raccoons, foxes, and skunks can't be relocated for that reason. There's a couple exceptions, like you could take like a baby raccoon or whatever that was orphaned and take it to like a handful of wildlife rehabilitators in the state that are licensed. But yes, that is correct. Please go ahead.
So you talked about historically there's many more beavers like in the state of Maryland.
Right.
Like on an order of magnitude, like the amount of beavers
it would be so difficult to quantify that I think I almost don't want to try, but I'd say we're probably at maybe like 10%, 10 to 15%, which given like the fact that pre-contact, you know, were perhaps there were, let's be like super generous and say 100,000 people in the state of Maryland, right? 100,000 natives. We're at 8 million now. So I think with the amount of competing resources and the amount of other pressures on our riparian systems, that's actually like a pretty healthy number. But it's at a level where in some habitats, and there's not equal distribution there, right? I think there's some places that are much closer to historic levels because they have lower population densities. But in a lot of habitats, beavers are at a point where they are at kind of that cultural carrying capacity, right? They're in all the they maintain habitation in all the places that they're tolerated or the places that are good habitat. And they move into sink habitat, so places that might not maintain like a constant water level, or places where they're just not tolerated by people. So like adjacent to agriculture, some suburban settings, you know, whatever the case. But overall, I think it would be difficult, at least in the Piedmont and west in the state, to go to almost any stream channel not be within like half a mile to 3/4 mile of like a beaver influence structure. So it's modest compared to historic levels, but pretty much everything else is too. So I don't think we're doing bad as far as beavers go. Please go ahead.
What did you say was the present population of beavers?
So we don't have an excellent idea of how many, like censuses are really tough with wildlife management. There's a number of different ways that I think other states have tackled that. Like you can use remote sensing in some ways, like you could create models based on like beaver habitation in some areas, but we don't know. But I think in terms of like habitat saturation for suitable habitat, it's essentially 100%. So they maintain tens of thousands certainly, perhaps more. Yes. Yeah, I think North Carolina is the closest state that has a population estimate, and it's getting a little old now, but I think theirs is in the hundreds of thousands. Keeping in mind North Carolina is a really, really big state, but they also have a lot of water in similar environments. So like I think if you were to extrapolate Maryland's coastline and like the number of like river miles or whatever, I think we probably have comparable amounts of beaver in the same habitat. Please.
Yeah, the stream near my house is
Yes.
mostly fed by stormwater runoff.
Okay.
And it goes from a trickle to flood off in one.
Very quickly, very flashy.
And I've never seen a beaver there.
Right.
I was wondering, does that repel beavers, or would they be attracted to it? Or?
So it's just not sustainable, especially in a place where really either a bank den or a lodge wouldn't be suitable. So something that goes from a trickle to like a storm surge really quickly would just wash away a lodge, or it would totally cover up like a bank den to a point where like, you know, there wouldn't be any oxygen. And without a kind of a reliable water level, beavers can store water, but there's a lot of sideboards on that. So they can only capture so much water, because like the dams are leaking constantly. So if it's only a trickle, it's probably not going to be enough for them to build kind of the infrastructure that they need to maintain habitation at that site. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just kind of wondered too, if a dam has been abandoned, what's the recurrence of another beaver moving back into that same site? Like, will the beavers come back, or is it just
So
kind of...
oftentimes you'll have beavers, if a site works for a beaver once, it can work for another beaver again. Sometimes they'll pull up shop for like reasons that aren't apparent to us. Could be parasite load in that dam, it could be food resources, it could be any number of things. They often won't rehabilitate the same structures, but they'll build one close by. But some sites that are just good, they can maintain beavers in the same structure for generations. Like there's a couple sites that I'm thinking of that I know beavers have been constantly using for like 20 years. So in some cases that are just really good habitat, you can have like really sustainable long-term habitation. But I'd say that's probably like the exception, not the norm. Yeah. Go ahead, Jordan.
So I know that beaver dam analogs are like a type of stream restoration practice.
BDAs.
What's the incidence of beavers coming and colonizing those man-made analogs?
So, Jordan's question, for those of you who are unfamiliar, beaver dam analogs are kind of this like novel technique where it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a beaver dam analog, so contractors, as a way of slowing like a stream channel down, instead of using like engineered structures or like rock that they have to truck in like riprap, they'll take woody debris from the site and essentially construct something that slows the water level down, brings the flow like closer to the ground level. And they'll create something that's akin to a beaver dam in the channel. It's still like, it's a novel technique. And I'll say that because I don't want to detract from it too much. One of the reasons why contractors like it is because it uses materials at the site, so it's inexpensive to install for them. So it saves them some money. It has some ecological residuals. I think the verdict's out on that one. You know, I definitely think like it mimics natural processes. Like even if it's not beaver installed, like log jams are probably something that were present in a lot of our riverine systems prior to colonization that had similar benefits, right? So I don't think that it probably has some good effects. If you're increasing like water depth in a way that, you know, makes it more habitable to beavers, or you're influencing the vegetative regime, like potentially it could. I don't know of any cases where a beaver's like gone to one of those within 2 to 3 years of construction. And I think the projected lifespan of one of those structures is around 10 years without maintenance. Yeah, good question though. It's novel, so verdict's out. In general, I think it works, but I think contractors like selling it because the input cost is low. Yeah, go ahead.
Are there like trade-offs between beaver dams, the water quality benefits, and like those benefits, and like fish passage concerns? Like are those fish barriers?
Man, you're like in on all the stuff that people talk about in the world. If you ask a fisheries biologist and a beaver advocate, they'll give you different answers. In general, I would say that in antiquity, you would have expected beaver dams to be present along a lot of those waterways anyway. And like I said, they're semi-porous structures. So especially fish like salmonid species that can they can jump, they can get some like serious airtime, right? Like I think it's probably less of a concern. I think in this region, like yellow perch and white perch movement up some of the smaller streams, like it could be prohibitive, but then you have like flashy rainwater events that also wash some of those dams out during the spring. I don't really take too hard of a stance on it. Some states go out of their way to remove beaver dams on like streams that are important to salmonid fisheries, so like trout streams, salmon streams. I don't know that it's necessary. I don't really know that it's not. I think in general that they're probably a little heavy-handed on the side of the fish rather than the beaver right now, and that we could probably turn that down a little bit. But I think both sides of that argument will tell you that it's settled literature one way or the other, and I don't like to get in the middle. Yeah, that's a great question. No, it really is. Because I think fish passage has kind of been one of those things that has been used to defeat like beaver, like restoration or whatever, up until recently. So I don't think that it's illegitimate, but I think it's probably a little over exaggerated. Just giving you my opinion. Correct. I mean, you have to keep in mind, like, some of these places that we're trying to, like, ensure fish passage for, it's fish passage for, like, introduced German brown trout, right? So, like, kind of like Yeah, right. Please.
I was just, this is a weird question, but you obviously have a lot of knowledge about this, and you've lived this for a long time, and you've had to condense that into a very short presentation. So what is the one thing you would hope that we come away from learning from you
That's
here
not a weird
and
question.
see differently today?
Cool. No, that gives me a lot to work with. So, one of the conversations that I was having prior to the presentation is like, how did I get into fur bearers and beavers? So, one of my primary jobs as a fur bearer biologist is to kind of be a subject matter expert, but it's also to regulate the interface of trappers. I was more of a beaver trapper than I am now, but I'm still currently a practicing trapper, and I think the multifaceted role of trapping in our culture is one that I'd encourage you to think about a little bit more. I think that it's something that isn't thought about very often, but any time that somebody in this room or just in Maryland needs an animal removed from their attic, or they have a groundhog under the shed or whatever that they want to get rid of, they're calling a trapper. The form that trapping takes now is very different than what it took 200 years ago. It's very closely regulated. It's efficient and researched. So yeah, I would encourage you to, I have so many presentations on trapping, just kind of the forms that it takes now, and why it's so much better than it was then, and why the traps have evolved so much, and the methods and the trappers themselves have evolved so much. And I don't have time to get into that, but
Thank you. Well, I'll look into it because I'm one of those people that trapping gives me this knee-jerk.
Yeah, totally.
Thing, so
And it did for
think
me at
about
one
that.
point in time too. But totally. Please go ahead. Everybody.
Just because it's related to what you were talking about,
Go ahead.
I was wondering, so do we need to, not that I need one now, but
Mhm.
do we need to look for a licensed trapper? How do we know it's not like Joe's doing
So
it as a side project?
It didn't
I mean, really, there's a lot of unlicensed contractors out there.
Yes, absolutely. And just like everything, I worked in the tree care industry for a little bit. There's a lot of people that will just will top your trees, and they'll do these awful pruning practices. Here we are.
They'll say, yeah.
So
I'm not authorized
that
to
QR code, if somebody wants to, or
Is it
if you
within
want to take a picture of
this
it,
presentation?
that takes you to our nuisance wildlife contractor directory. So everybody on there has passed a certain bar of they're accredited by the state. So I wish that meant that every single one of them was super professional and service with a smile kind of deal. Not all of them are, but they all know the best practices, and they all know how to do the job. So that's that. If you find somebody off of that directory, that's the surefire way of knowing that you're dealing with somebody that's licensed to some degree professional.
So it's like a licensed trapper directory.
That's correct. And you enter your permit county, so you'd enter Montgomery or Prince George's or wherever you live, and it'll populate a list of everybody that works in that county. Yeah.
And we'll post the
So-
presentation.
Please.
Why would someone want to purchase a beaver pelt?
Why would somebody want to purchase a beaver pelt? It's an excellent question. So this beaver pelt is actually they're round when they're put up. It's not for the reason that you would historically. A lot of beavers historically were used for fur trim. So I could pass this around again if anybody's interested. The fur, on the belly, has different qualities than the fur along the back. So this would be used to trim jackets, or people would make coats out of it. Nowadays, most beaver consumption is still domestic, but do you know why beavers were originally trapped when colonizing the western United States, what those pelts were used for?
The beavers were trapped, 200-300 years ago.
Yes.
Because a lot of the European people wanted a warm winter coat.
So it wasn't coats, it was hats. What if I told you it was still hats? Does anybody in the room, probably not this room, but does anybody watch Yellowstone? Like I said, probably not this room. I don't watch Yellowstone. Cowboy hats and country western cultures, it's kind of like, it's having a mainstream moment right now. Like Beyonce just made a country record, right? Beyonce's wearing a Stetson hat. It's made out of beaver.
So they scrape off the fur and
So-
then put the leather?
Because beavers are semi-aquatic, really pretty fully aquatic species, and again, I'm happy to circulate this so you guys can all see it individually. The fur has two different qualities, and your dog has this too to some extent, or your cat or whatever. You don't on your head, you have a singular kind of hair. But there's an outer guard hair and there's an under fur that's really dense. And that under fur has these like microscopic barbs on it that seal up and make it pretty water retardant. But it also makes it like, it gives it superior qualities for felting, more so than other fibers like rabbit or pretty much anything else synthetic. The plug that I would make to you for this is that beaver pelts are completely renewable. Because they're managed in a sustainable way, trappers can remove beavers off the landscape that are then replenished the next year without harm to the populations. If you juxtapose that with any man-made fiber, like your marmot rain jacket, your North Face parka, whatever, all that insulation and all that facing fabric is made from petroleum. It's going to be good for 10 years until it gets UV faded or it springs too many leaks, and then you're going to throw it away. There's people that have the same cowboy hat for a lifetime. So it's kind of a vanity thing. It might not be a necessity, but it's sustainable, it's renewable, and it's something that's high quality. So I think that there's some value in that. Yeah, for sure. But excellent question.
I have to make a plug and read the book Once They Were Hats. It's such a good like beaver history.
They're still hats. A little bit. Please go ahead.
When do they do their work? Are they nocturnal or?
Mainly, beavers are mainly nocturnal. In areas where they're around people a lot and they don't have any negative pressure on them, you'll see them out during the day. So like Black Hills Regional Park, that reservoir, like you can see beavers out during the day pretty commonly. I'm trying to think where else, like Gunner's Lake off of Wisteria, like there's probably beavers there. There were beavers there when I was growing up. There's probably still some there. They're always out during the day there, but it's because like they don't experience predation, during the day, and they have no reason other than just rest or laziness to not be out. Yeah, please.
Are they bothered by coyotes?
Coyotes will, like, a large coyote would be like 30 to 35 pounds, maybe a little bit more.
Packs too, they can.
A large, they can, in general, they're solitary, especially in this region. A coyote will absolutely, like, opportunistically grab a beaver, but you have to keep in mind, like, a large beaver starts at, like, 40 pounds and goes up to 80. So at a certain point, like, the odds are kind of stacked in the beaver's favor. But definitely, like, young, close to a den that are naive or something like that, a coyote would absolutely opportunistically take it. Now, there's some, like, some diet research from, like, wolves in the Midwest, or, like, the upper lake states, really, where, like, some of the wolves in Minnesota, not all of them, but every now and then, like, they'll learn how to specialize on beavers, and they'll learn how to pick them out of stream channels. So there's some wolves and some of that research that, like, certain times a year, 90% of the diet's beaver, which I think is cool. Yeah, the coyotes, maybe when they're traveling overland, maybe when they're coming out to eat something, but again, probably the modestly sized, more naive animals, not the big ones. Yeah, good question.
I have one more different question.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Michaela, how am I doing on time? Am I running this over or whatever? Okay, yeah, I could keep on taking. Let me know when I should stop.
Well, I was just wondering, so like,
Yeah.
sorry, was there?
It's a good question. Keep going.
Okay, so say a beaver moves into, like an area, say behind our house.
Right.
Like, or our community, like what should we expect in terms of, like, how many trees they're taking down, how many bushes they're taking down, like, or, like, how?
It's just
Sort
gonna,
of
it's
what
gonna be
the
so
cycle
variable,
is.
and like it's why it's so hard to give kind of uniform advice, because a lot of it has to do with, like, do you have a basement, do you have a septic drain field, like, do you, like, how much water can you tolerate? sometimes they won't extend the stream channel at all if they construct a bank den and the channel's deep enough to where they don't need to. But if it's shallow and they need to deepen the channel, they'll construct a pond that comes with a dam, maybe fell with trees and all this. So kind of the best advice that I can give in that regard is like you have to be willing to be, it's hard to be proactive. You kind of have to be reactive, which doesn't always give you a lot of time. But as long as if you want to make coexistence a priority, I'd say like kind of starting at that standpoint, and just like watch, maintain a holding pattern until something comes up that you need to address. The only proactive step that I'd take, if you know that there's a beaver moving in somewhere close to you, is if they haven't chewed down your Japanese maple and your peach tree already, like put a cage around.
Yeah.
Right, but that's kind of the only proactive thing you can do.
Or let them plant
But like,
a native tree.
Or I'm sorry.
I said let them and plant a native tree.
Yeah, that's it. Or like I said, some of the stuff that they cut down, it'll regenerate naturally, but it's in a way that's like self-reinforcing for that beaver.
Yeah, it's just good to know like that
Totally.
that will happen, and then
Right.
and be able to explain that to people, right? As opposed to just leaving it as like,
So,
okay, now
one more
like, double trees are
from a
coming down.
wildlife standpoint, like one plug that I have to put out there, and Jordan gave the recommendation like plant native plants when you can. And that's great advice. However, you also need to make peace with the fact that like native animals like to eat native plants.
Yeah.
Right? So you're stocking the larder for these deer and the rabbits and the whatever. So temper your expectations, because it's like you're creating wildlife habitat. Like you should kind of celebrate when the wildlife use it, but like I'm a gardener too, and like oh man, like do deer frustrate me. So it's like you kind of just have to do more on your end. But plant the native plants, but don't be surprised when native animals jump on.
Plant them, but don't get emotionally attached.
Yeah.
What's like the largest size of tree that they can
With the right attitude.
I think like the biggest one that I've seen them go all the way through is probably like an oak tree with like a 31 or 32 inch stem, like a significant tree. But oftentimes they'll girdle trees that are even larger than that. They'll just eat the bark all the way around. And wildlife management and forestry are really allied fields, right? Like a lot of my friends went to school to learn how to grow and sell trees. So a lot of them like despise beavers. They think they're really wasteful because a beaver will take a tree, that it's a great timber tree, they'll girdle it, they'll make it valueless. However, what that beaver's doing, the beaver doesn't realize it's doing it. However, when it kills a large stem tree close to the stream channel, it's allowing sunlight to hit the forest floor from everything that tree would have shaded. So it's regenerating like herbaceous plants out of the seed bank. You have stumps sprouting from that tree, but it's creating habitat that makes that area better for the beaver. So it's reinforcing ecological processes that are very natural. And then of course you have this large standing dead tree that's going to be like a snag, and it's going to be like cavity habitat, and like it's going to be some level of habitat for like generations of wildlife beyond that. So nature doesn't care about the dollar signs. It doesn't care about whether a tree's worth $3,000 or $20. Beavers don't care about early growth trees. They don't mind chewing on them. Yeah, they'll get after trees that are really big though, for sure.
Would it be okay if I put in the club?
Yeah, please.
There's a volunteer naturalist over at Seneca Creek Park, Bonnie Battles, or I saw one of her pictures up on the slides.
Oh, you did?
And she does weekly hikes, hike for about an hour and a half, all over Seneca Creek Park, down the trails and stuff outside the recreational area. I started attending in October, and we have been monitoring beaver lodges and beaver dams. She's a wealth of knowledge. We don't see beavers, but it's interesting to go every 2-3 weeks and see where they live and what they've done, and the amazing amount of trees they take down, and
Seneca Creek is a great place to see beavers in Montgomery County.
on the Great Seneca Trail.
Yeah.
Right along there, there's some really active.
Very, very healthy, robust beaver population.
That's really cool because we do it regularly, and so
Right.
you get to see their behavior and their habitat. We have yet to actually see beaver in action, but.
If I'm being honest, that's really surprising to me. It's pretty surprising to me that you guys haven't seen one. I don't know Bonnie. She worked there. I know of her. No, thank you for putting that out there, Trish.
I was astounded, I'm new to learning about beavers this past year or so. And we went through one part of the park, and it looked like the logging company had come in.
Yeah.
It was smaller trees and stuff, but it was level, right next to a dam.
Yeah, I think it's just like in the environmental world, it's like trees good, cutting down trees bad. And it can be, difficult to kind of like reconcile and come to peace with the fact that like what you're looking at is a very natural process. It's been happening forever, and it reinforces a lot of regeneration, a lot of good habitat work that then just creates a lot of diversity and is good. It's good for game species. It's good for passerine birds, herpetofauna, just pretty much everything.
Same thing with observing like that, you get to see where beavers had been some years
Yes.
ago and see exactly.
You watch the
what's
habitat
happening,
age back
what's
into
growing,
something.
regenerating.
Exactly. Yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing. Seneca Creek State Park is, the day use area is just okay. It's pretty frequented, but like the trail system that Seneca Creek maintains is pretty impressive.
The topics are on the park website, and they, when you're held changes from month to month, but you can find it on the account.
All set?
Yeah, proceed.
Good deal. All right, I'm gonna do a couple of quick closing slides just to get them out of the way, and then we'll do trivia until time's up for the night. Get the boring stuff out of the way so we don't have to end with that. First, just a reminder that we have this open survey. You can send us specific locations of pollution or any problem sites that you're aware of. You can also give us overarching concerns about things going on in the watershed, so tell us what matters to you. Also, please sign up for our volunteer stream assessments. We have contractors from Land Studies, which is a group of geomorphologists going out in July to assess 50 miles of streams in the city's watersheds, but there are 192 miles of streams in the city's watersheds. So we want volunteers to go out and just document conditions, take some pictures, let us know if you see some bad erosion, and that'll really help us come up with a list of areas to go look at with contractors in more detail in the future. Our next meeting will be on Wednesday, July 23rd, and it is one I'm very excited about, but yeah, apparently not as exciting of a topic as wildlife, according to some people. But this is our drinking water meeting. We will be having a presenter from the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission, which is the utility that manages the drinking water intake on the Potomac River, which is where all of you get your drinking water. So I'm really looking forward to it. Last thing is on your note cards, please write down if you have any questions or things you would really like to learn about drinking water from WSSC for our next meeting, or if you just have any questions about your drinking water in general. Whether that's like, how do they make sure the Potomac River stays clean? Because obviously like land drains to water, stuff like that. So yeah, let us know what you want us to ask them to focus on. And with that, there's a little post-meeting survey. We'll send out these slides so you can have access to all 1 million QR